Well, I still put drop bars on my door. See, at night when I go to bed, I have these bars and I put them on the doors, big bars. This is 10 years in this ceasefire, and I still use drop bars. Because we've always used drop bars. You've always, before you went to bed, you always put your bars on the doors and make sure all the bolts are on and stuff like that, in case they try to smash the doors in the middle of the night, which would be one of our tactics, you know. While you're sleeping in bed, you see to smash the door in and run in and shoot the house up, you know. So 10 years later, I'm still putting drop bars on. And it's not because I'm a nervous wreck or I'm unstable. It's just it was a way of life for so long. And as I said, I don't still trust loyalists, you know, because that's the way it is, you know.
See this guy here crossing the road? See him, Elizabeth? See that fella there? See that lad there, look? See this man here crossing the road I waved to? Now, his name's Billy Gorman. He was arrested in 1979 and charged with the murder of a policeman when he was 14 years of age. He served 16 years in prison, and it was proven that himself and his brother-in-law, who also was charged with him, were innocent. He didn't do it. This corner here is a very dangerous corner for black taxi drivers. We've had one driver shot dead and another two wounded at it. One of our drivers, Q McGee, was shot dead here on the 10th of October 1991. We are now in a Catholic nationalist area. Let's jump in here.
Loyalist terrorists are being blamed for this morning's murder and attempted murder in North Belfast. A 19-year-old man was shot dead in a house in Duvarren Crescent, and another man was critically injured in a gun attack on the Crumlin Road. Loyalist sources say neither man was a member of any paramilitary organisation. Police have captured an escaped prisoner who'd been on the run for more than a month. Sinn Féin have condemned a sectarian attack on the Catholic Church at Harryville in Ballymena. Paint was thrown over the church and a slogan was daubed on the door.
Up to 3 years interest-free credit. Ask for written details. And Windows 2000 also offer a unique 5-star insurance-backed warranty. So for your new...
Okay, that's that on that. Cheers. Right, Davey. Shows your choppers. Everything all right, mate? You see, before the ceasefires, see all these roads here? You always had permanent roadblocks. The army would have had roadblocks up. They would have had a couple of vehicles parked up and they'd have had a lane of traffic. They'd have slowed all the traffic down and they would have searched the cars, and if they spotted particular people, they pulled the car over and got them out of the car and body searched them and harassed them. In a lot of cases, they made you take your shoes off in the street. Tried to make you open your mouth. Opened the bonnet and searched around the engine and opened the boot and took all the contents out, searched under the wheel arches. In some cases, they would bring dogs in and put the dogs in and let them sniff around for explosives, traces of explosives. You know, just been a nuisance more than anything, you know. But what was actually happening was that you had a lot of collusion, right? You had informal collusion and you had formal collusion, where you had members of the state military apparatus working with loyalist death squads from these areas here. Where in the past, the British would have done a lot of their shoot to kills themselves, a lot of assassinations themselves, but this in turn was bad publicity framings and bad propaganda. So what they did was they used loyalists as proxy killers for them.
One of my colleagues was shot dead. A man called Hugh McGee was shot dead on the 10th of October 1991. I was close, where I was working with him that night. I was actually behind him when he was shot dead. Another man, Joseph Devlin, his taxi was fired on. Paul Mulvaney's taxi was fired on. A young woman called Patricia Galway was shot in the face in his taxi. Sammy Baker's taxi was fired on. Donny Hughes' taxi was fired at. Michael Canavan's taxi was fired at. This is all in the space of a year and a half. There was also attacks with missiles, bricks, bottles, etc. on the taxis. But most of what you were afraid of was the attacks with gunfire. It was when I'm driving these taxis. If someone tries to stop me wearing a pair of gloves, I drive past them. I don't stop for anybody with a pair of gloves. I never ever pull in behind a vehicle to pick someone up or let someone out. I always drive in front of the vehicle. So I do, so as I can't be boxed in. So that if anything was to happen, I'd be able to get away. It's just conditioning, so it is. It's the way I am. I don't think I'm paranoid. It's just these type of things can, when the conflict was on here, these type of things could have meant the difference in life or death.
We don't venture outside our own routes. It'd be too dangerous. Because, you know, the politics of the country wouldn't allow it. Where they have their own infrastructures, we have our own infrastructure within our areas, and they don't mingle, except if you go into the city centre of Belfast, you know. But when you come out of the city centre, you go back into your own reservation, so to speak. That's the situation.
Actually, George W. Bush is really not back for the coyotes deal on climate change and G8 summits, despite the fact that it's not the British agenda. He says it's going to America for people.
Now, believe it or not, you see a cemetery. A local, say, the Protestants are buried down here and the Catholics are built at the top half. Now, you have to remember that the Protestants controlled it. All the different institutions and government throughout the north. And when they were actually building this here, opening up a cemetery, it was discovered by a local historian that there's a wall built under the ground in the cemetery to separate the Catholics and the Protestants, even in their death. You know, it's an extreme example of apartheid, where even in death the people were separated and made to feel different. You know, we didn't create this problem. You have to remember it. This is our country. We live here and we were born here. And historically our ancestors were all Irish people, and this is where we belong. But what happened was the Unionists, through the British government, had control of the governments here, and political power, economic power, religious power. And Catholics were basically discriminated against in education and housing. You know, just like South Africa or anywhere else where the ruling party exists, a foreign body that exists.
This whole state was founded on the whole notion that Catholics were second-class citizens. For example, my father worked in the docks, and there were two types of dock. So there was the low dock and the high dock, and my father worked in the low dock, and the ships that come in, they come in, it was the international ships that come in, so you weren't sure when they'd be coming in, so he was only employed when ships were there to unload, and it was all Catholics worked there. On the high dock, it was where the ferries come in, and they come in every day, 2 or 3 times a day, from Liverpool, Ardrossan, Stranraer and Glasgow. So the people that worked on that dock were always assured of a job, they were always assured of employment, and they were all Protestants, so they were. So you had that type of discrimination even within the docks, where Catholics were casual and the Protestants had permanent jobs.
Okay.
Right, love.
And then 1969 came along, the civil rights movement had been set up in 1968. And on the 2nd of August 1969, a Protestant march attempted to come into this area, and they actually attacked the area with the help of the police force. Many people who were arrested, beaten, and Paddy Corey was beaten and he died. He died several weeks later of his injuries. And I watched the police beating this man who I had seen was, you know, I didn't know him, I'd never spoken to the man, but he seemed to be a quiet, inoffensive person. And it was this systematic manner of the way they beat him to death, because I can recall it, watching it and being stunned. It was so systematic. It wasn't a frenzied attack, it was methodical, the way they beat the man. And I just looked at it and I thought to myself, this isn't the way police behave. You know, this shouldn't be happening. And I began to ask questions, and then within relatively short time, within a couple of months, it had become clear the nature of the state and what the state would do to suppress Catholics. And that's when you could say I became radicalised at the age of 13, just turning 14.
You want off Billy Murphy Rudolph?
Yes, please.
There you are, love. Sure, Rudolph, you okay? Go ahead, love. You know, as a young person, things were pretty simplistic in my opinion, from where I was coming from. You know, I'm Irish, this is Ireland, and our country's been occupied by the British. We don't want them here. They're not going to leave peacefully. You know, so that's where I stood. There was no big moral decision about, you know, could I accept hurting or killing British soldiers. That wasn't a problem. I don't mean that flippantly, because, you know, it's not nice to kill people, it's not nice to maim people. But when you're in a war situation, you're left with no alternative. You know, people have been fighting wars for years and years and years throughout the world. And sometimes it's the only method to bring about moral change, you know. So I had no big moral decision to make about joining the IRA.
Let's go. Hey, come on.
I had never heard of the IRA. Well, I'd heard of the IRA, you'd heard of the songs, people were singing songs. After the pogroms in 1969, the IRA began to reorganise. Before the pogroms, the IRA were a dead organisation, they were moribund. After the pogroms occurred, the IRA began to reorganise and it began to retrain and recruit. In the area that I lived in, there would have been 2 old IRA men before August 1969. After August 69, people were flocking to join the IRA. They had so many people flocking to join it that they had to stop recruiting. And I remember one time, and it was a Saturday afternoon, must have been about September 1969. It was me and some of my friends were playing football, and there was an attempted incursion by loyalists into the area that we lived in, and these guys ran past us with guns, and it was the first time ever I had saw, you know, people, civilians with guns, and it was 3 civilians ran past me. I knew them very, very well. I didn't have masks on. There were men that came from the area and they ran past us with guns, and we sort of stopped and went, Jesus. And their whole thing was they were so nonchalant. It was, go ahead, just continue playing there, boys, it'll be okay, you know. And you were sort of reassured by this, that you weren't going to be attacked, and that if you were going to be attacked, that there was someone there to defend you. And this was the IRA. The IRA basically started out after 1969 as the defenders of the nationalist population.
So my father was interned and my brother was interned, and then the other brother was caught in a bombing mission, and then my sister was detained on the word of an army officer who accused her of plotting operations against the soldiers. So like in a very short time suddenly there was 4 beds emptied, there was 4 missing, you know what I mean? And I always remember that because my mother would have been visiting these jails pretty regular. It was a very, very hard time for her, you know. But at the time, there was a very, very high level of IRA activity. You know, there were, at that time, a lot of gun battles on a regular basis between the IRA and the British Army. And they basically lay on the ground. They slept up for ages on the ground. That's probably been on for years, you know. And I remember my sister had a child, Gerald, and he would have been the first nephew, and he actually slept in, they'd take a drawer out, a chest of drawers, he actually slept in the drawer, not in the chest but on the ground, you know what I mean? That was like his wee cat, you know, so you always below window level, you know what I mean, because the chances of a stray bullet. You know, that's you just naturally want the bed on the floor. We didn't use the beds, it's too dangerous. Like I remember the first time I experienced the death was my mate, a friend of mine, his father. This was back about 1970, and he used to travel through a Protestant area, coming home from work on the bus. Well, the Lord had stopped the bus, and they went on the bus and picked him out and shot him dead. And that was really, to us, we were young at the time, 9 or 10. And that was a shock to us. It's something so brutal. Because having the fact on us so close, you know. Where you hear things, it's abstract, you know what I mean? But that was my first time ever I experienced somebody being killed, you know. And I remember he stayed in our house that night and the family were crying and it was a big dramatic situation for them, you know. That was one of my earliest memories. And then there was another time when we were children as well. The IRA executed an informer, a person who was informing. And we were children and we were sitting like in a field like this, and we had a wee fire going and we were playing about, you know. The next minute a van stopped about 20 yards from us and we heard the shooting. And we looked around, you know, and the body was kicked out of the van was the guy's hands were tied behind his back, and his feet were tied, and he had a hood on his head, and he's shot all blood like, and they kicked him out, and the van spun off, you know, and that was like, that was frightening too, you know, as a child. And this was all very, very early, but as time went on, there was more killings, there was more experiences, and you know, you end up you adapted to what was going on, you know. Every hour you listen to turn the news on to see what happened and things like that, you know.
It's 2 o'clock, the news with Anne Dawson. A standoff is continuing between Orange men and Nationalist residents in the village of Dunloy. Riot police are there and a road has been blocked by protesters. Julian O'Neill is at the scene.
An articulated lorry trailer is still blocking the route into Dunloy. More than 100 Nationalist residents have gathered on the road behind it.
Loyalists have over 3,000 parades throughout the year here, and only a few of them are contentious. Only a few of them are contentious, and these are Loyalist parades that want to march through Catholic areas. And Nationalists feel that where a Loyalist parade isn't wanted, it shouldn't go, especially through Nationalist areas. Now, they have been calling for dialogue with the Orange Order, which is the body that's responsible for most of the parades. The Orange Order will not go into dialogue with Nationalist residents. Now, in this area, because there has been violence at the last number of Orange parades, residents from here put a compromise to the Orange Order, which was that the Orange March should be allowed to march freely down at 8 o'clock in the morning without let or hindrance. But it's not so much the Orange March. Well, it is the Orange March because of what the Orange Order stands for. It's an anti-Catholic organisation. It's very, very triumphalist. And what they are about is they are celebrating the ascendancy of Protestantism within Ireland and the subjugation of Catholicism. That is what they are commemorating every year. So what the local people put forward as a compromise was that the Orange Order should be allowed to walk down on the 12th of July morning, without let or hindrance. But that at night, when the parade was over, that they should get into buses and drive up, to drive back to their homes. They objected to this. They want to be able to march down and then march back up with what amounts to about 1,000 of their camp followers. These are people who will be drunk, they will be rowdy, and they will be violent. So they will be insulting to their Catholic neighbours. So what they wanted, what the locals suggested was that they be bussed up, you know, to avoid confrontation. The Orange Order rejected this, and the Parades Commission rejected it. They rejected a compromise.
na cuidir fáil den Afra, $2 billion ar fad. Ag deireadh chruinnithe in Glen Eagles in Albany inniu, dúirt Kennedy in G8 go raibh siad take ar chóiréiteach faoi chóirsaí trádáile, faoi chóir leight gon gadidir chef, faoi íocha wathu agus go leidó faoi na fóilúntas feirime. Tá sé rásí John Dillon óchtárán go chumann na bheirmóí go mbeadh troch féachar ag turadh chruinnithe an G8 ar income na bheirmóí sa tír seo. Agus an aimsin be sé scamach cináltacht. Glána sé sa chud is mú an síle mórdach ach be sé ceomhrannach ar chós daoinéair agus a dúsceart na síide, sinna bhfuil a phríomhscealt.
morning.
Right, we'll go now. I've been arrested, I think I've been arrested about 50 times, maybe more. I was in Castlereagh, I was in Castlereagh Interrogation Centre more than 20 times, probably about 26, 27 times, and just have been arrested in the street. When you get brought into Castlereagh, you could be held for anything up to 7 days incognito. But what the British Army could arrest you in the street and hold you for 4 hours. At a time. They could arrest you, bring you into their barracks and interrogate you for 4 hours, and then they either had to hand you over to the police or release you. And I must have been arrested 40, 50 times by the British Army, just being lifted in the street.
It's 11 minutes to 2. Good afternoon. City Beat, my request. You choose the songs that Belfast listens to. Thank you for all your requests today. You keep the show going. What to get on this week? City Beat 96.7 FM and David Lloyd Brackett at Fitness Club. I'll give you a good chance.
But the day we were arrested, it was an ambush on a foot patrol of British soldiers on this here particular road in Andersonstown. And there's a high point on these flats, which would have been back about 300 yards. And the shooting point was from the flats down to where the soldiers were. There was a soldier shot. He was injured. He was shot a number of times. Fortunately for him, he survived it. He didn't die. But we were arrested moments afterwards because we weren't quick enough to get away, obviously, right? We were arrested with 2 rifles. We recovered 2 Armalites. Our clothes were full of forensics, gun residue. The weapons were linked to the shooting of a soldier through ballistics test. So scientifically, we were stuffed, you know. See just these shops here? This is where the soldier was standing when he was shot, on the right-hand side. Just over here. We were able to bait the attempted murder on the grounds that, on a technicality. But we were found guilty of the possession of weapons with possession with intent to endanger life. And the 3 of us were sentenced to 18 years in jail. And we were actually quite happy with getting 18 years because we knew that if we had been convicted of the shooting of the soldier, we'd have got 3 life sentences, which the judge told us he would have given us. But we got the 18 years anyway.
we just found out that my wife was pregnant. She was suffering from vertigo. And my daughter had just started nursery school. So I would stay out of the house at night, but I would come into the house about 9 o'clock in the morning, 8:30, 9, because you knew they weren't going to, the raids were generally at about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. So I get into the house at approximately 8:45, 8:45. I got into the house, and I was only in the house a couple of minutes when I heard the street being sealed off. And I said to myself, this isn't right. So I looked out the window and I saw the street being sealed halfway up and at the top. So I ran out the back to try and get out the entry, and I heard them coming up the entry. So I did, up and down the entry both ways. So I went back in again, and I was going to go up the stairs into the attic and down through neighbours' houses to drop down behind the cordon. When I was running up the stairs, my young daughter shouted, "Daddy!" And this policeman put a gun through the window and aimed up the stairs at me, and he said, "Come down, open the door, I'll shoot." So I walked down, let them in, and I just knew, I had this feeling, because I was only out of Castlereagh 3 days, I just had this feeling that there's something wrong here. With a level, normally they just come with 2 or 3 vehicles to arrest you. This was full-scale operation. There was maybe 40 or 50 police and soldiers, and I went to myself, there's something wrong here. I was brought into Castlereagh. I was left for about 4 hours. And then I was brought down for interrogation. And as soon as I went in for the interrogation, the police were laughing. They were really, really upbeat. And one of them said to me, "Long runs a fox." And I just looked at him, and he says, "You're going away for a long time, son." And it just became obvious then. They brought the informer in, Christopher Black. He made a statement against me, so he did. I was charged after 7 days. Spent 18 months on remand, and then I was sentenced on the 3rd of August 1983 to life imprisonment. And this man that was arrested was a man called Christopher Black, who I never met in my life. And when he walked into the room to me, I went, "Who is he?" The information he gave on me was totally incorrect. He gave a wrong name, he gave a wrong address. It was obvious that he didn't know me. A policeman actually admitted in court, giving Black my name and address. He actually admitted that we told him who this man was, and Black didn't know him, didn't know who he was, but we told him who he was, and I still got life imprisonment. At first it's a shock, so it is, when the prospect of life imprisonment, of not seeing your children growing up, of not being with your partner. And for about, I would say, a couple of months, it was a real shock, so it was. And then I began to realise, look, you can't live like this. You have to live with, you have to live in the time that you're in, and you have to get real. You can't imagine what's going on outside. You are where you are, and you have to make the best of it.
But Maggie Thatcher says, she was the Prime Minister of England, and she made the statement that the H blocks were built as a knacker's yard for the IRA. In other words, they built these H blocks to break the IRA, And she believed, and the British government believed, that if they could break the prisoners, right, it would make people think twice outside about joining the IRA, because nobody wants to go up on the H blocks, you see? And the H blocks were brutal. They were notorious, to the stage where 10 men died in a hunger strike, because the conditions were brutal, and the prisoners couldn't do nothing because they're locked up in their cells, that they had to go on a hunger strike to make changes. 10 men had to die. Not one. You think they would have made concessions after one man dying, or 2 or 3 or 4, But it took 10 men to die for the Brits to make change. This here's the Antrim plot. These are all Republicans who've been killed or hanged or executed by the British from the Antrim area, County Antrim. If you look at these graves here, look at all them names. These are all people who have fought for Irish freedom. These people would rather be sitting in their houses and sitting with their wives and kids and getting on with their jobs, leading normal lives. You know what I mean? But when people decide to go out and fight, you know, there must be something fundamentally wrong in society. And when people make a conscious decision, they get involved in conflict, when they could avoid it, when they can turn the other cheek. But when people like us put their lives on the line and die, you know, and thousands of others who didn't die and went to prisons and just fought against the British, whether it's military or politically. So regarding motivation and capabilities, 10 out of 10, like, you know. You had serious bombings like this at Warren Point, where 18 paratroopers killed in one day. You know, things like that. Locally, all sorts of booby trap shootings, bombings, you name it. You know, very, very busy period. Very, very busy 30 years, you know. But we knew we weren't going to get a military victory. Do you understand what I mean? But the effort was there. You know, the sustainment was there. And the motivation was there as well. To keep the guerrilla war going at a very, very high temperature, you know.
He's got your hamburger!
Jev Napoleon in the Blatana, gur Mariach Niner is Glasgow-Rinne and Mummy London. Gur Deochas Kin Shachke Dinner Fad agus Tá Corlai Shachar a Kate that could shoot for Lohid in Hospital Cabrach. Bhí Farras má Colin a gun in the Galile agus Banas Akal a gun the Wio in the mask shoot the Gur Deoch in Ace the Place. Gur Deoch Willie John Walsh as má Colin, gur Bhí Shar Friend Fui Hama a Bhí Liverpool Street agus Algate Street. Chosha Fui Skin
it had devastating effects on my wife. My wife's still coming to terms with what happened to me. Myself, no, I'm philosophical about it, so yeah. But my wife has found it very hard to cope with it. So she has, even to this day. 24 years after it happened, my wife still finds it hard to come to terms with what happened to me. I think the two older children understand because it affected them so much. So I felt I had a lot of explaining to do to explain the position that I took. And they understand it, and I think that both of them respect me for it. They probably know that what I did cost them a lot of their childhood and that they didn't grow up with a father. But I think they are mature enough to realise that that I felt that I was doing the right thing and that I wasn't acting for myself. I was acting for something that was more greater and tangible in the wider scheme of things.
But with the ceasefires came a more public face of the Republican movement, which was more encouraging and more acceptable to Catholics, but to Unionists, very, very hard to accept. That they didn't want to share the same seat with us. They didn't want to share the same tea set with us. You know, and they have to. They have to, because we're not going away. It's change which is happening in this country, you know. And I say that change bounces back, where if you go in the city centre now, you know, the city centre of Belfast, you'll see Catholic kids wearing Irish tops, football tops, Gaelic tops, you know, stuff like that. When I was a kid, you didn't go in the city centre wearing anything identifying you as a Catholic, because the chances of getting beat up by loyalist gangs was very, very serious, you know, and that's a reality. Terence O'Neill back in the 60s was the Prime Minister of this state, the British Prime Minister of this state, and he wanted to make reforms. He's seen the raising of the civil rights marches and the raising of the people, and he says, look, we're going to have to make changes here, we're going to have to make some reforms to the Catholics, give them some reforms, right? And the Unionist state reacted harshly and aggressive to him. He was forced to resign because he just thought about creating reforms for Catholics, never mind implementing them. And he had to leave his seat. He had to leave his country and go back to England. You know, that there's how much hatred and bitter the Unionist state was here in this country. And a government minister couldn't even suggest making reforms. You understand where we're coming from? So, if that's how they behaved to him, think back what it was like for us. You know, to knock on the door and say, we want reforms. To hit you with a bat in the face.
Well, I wouldn't do it again. I wouldn't do it again. No. Because the aims were unachievable. I realised that about 1985, 86, that the aims were unachievable, that violence was not going to free Ireland. And an awful lot of people had to, I'm not saying they had to die, but an awful lot of people died for us to be where we are now. I'm talking about, not talking about Republicans, I'm talking about the whole of the north of Ireland. And it's a terrible pity and a terrible shame. And if someone was to ask me, was it all worth it? I would have to say, no. No, that's me looking in hindsight at it. But this is where we are, and this is, we'll have to deal with it. So we do. But I don't think the whole thing was worth it, to be honest with you. Too many people languished in jail for too long. Too many innocent people were killed. And you're no closer to an Irish Republic or an Irish Socialist Republic than you were 30 years ago. If you can't convince these people to go into United Ireland, then there's going to have to be some form of accommodation with them. We can't defeat them, they can't defeat us, and if that's the case, then you have to look for a way out. And I don't see a United Ireland in my lifetime. But I'm not disappointed about that. I think if we have equality here, and we're treated with full equality, then for me that would amount to a United Ireland.